What's going on, Mark? How
How's it
you
going,
been?
man?
How's your week been?
Busy, busy,
Your
busy, busy.
your week of reefing.
Oh, my week of reefing's been good.
Yeah,
um,
some fun new lights on reef filters. Did you see the hybrid one with the uh, induction lamp with LEDs in the middle?
I saw it posted on my Facebook feed, but I hadn't clicked and read it yet. But I saw the stepper motors, and I was like, "Wait a minute, what's going on with this
Oh
light?"
no, no. So you're talking about the new light that I
Oh,
posted today
okay,
that was first showed off like 3 years ago. Is the what's it called? Solartronic. So it used to be called the
okay.
Focus 2. My beer maid is coming up here with some fresh, beautiful brew from next door. Thank you. Nom nom nom.
Cheers.
Cheers to that. Um, so yeah, it's been a really crazy few weeks for new lighting tech. We've got the LED and induction fluorescent hybrid. We had the Solartronic with swiveling LED clusters. Several weeks ago, we had the Sky LED. And we're still kind of riding the wave of the Kessel A500. So a lot of fun technology. I think we should, in a future session, take a deeper dive into all the different ways that lighting technology has changed and where it's gotten to today. But on this session of Reef Therapy, we're going to talk about something that could be a hot button issue.
Yeah, it might go into the get off my lawn zone.
It might, but I haven't had any coffee today. I only had tea, so I'm not quite as spirited as I might normally be. But I still think there's a lot of important things to say
Yeah,
about the value versus cost and pricing of aquarium corals.
yeah.
All right, so let's do a proper intro. I'm Jake Adams. You are listening to Reef Therapy, and I am joined by
Mark Vanderwall.
Mark Vanderwall. Mark, you want to start it off on what you think about the value of corals, the cost of corals? Where do you want to kind of broach this topic?
Yeah. So one of the deep thoughts I had about this was 20 years ago, and I'm not going to go into like price comparisons and things were cheaper back in the day, but what I find interesting is, and maybe you have more insight into this because you've been in that side of the business, but there was a time where being a coral farmer, and when I say a coral farmer, I don't mean somebody out, in Indonesia farming corals, but like somebody that's propagating corals stateside.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was a general consensus 20-ish years ago that there wasn't a lot of money to be had in being like a coral
I
farmer.
vaguely remember that.
And stores would even emphasize that the corals and the fish were just a vector to get people to set up tanks, and the real sales were in the hardware and also in the maintenance, right?
Yeah.
And so coral propagation was not a big money business back then, and I think that also lended itself more to people being more up for trading. And now, I mean, I got nothing against people making money and running a business and being successful at it. But now you see coral farmers driving, German cars and living pretty good, which is a good thing. But it's just an interesting shift that's happened. And I think part of that is in the valuation of corals. But I also kind of wonder, if you're growing corals and fragging them and you've got your own mother colonies that you're propagating from, that's a very time consuming, takes time, right? You got to grow them out. You got to use a lot of chemicals, not chemicals, but additives, calcium. Got to keep your alk up. You got to burn a lot through a lot of electricity to grow those frags. But now what you're seeing is, I wonder, and maybe this is jumping in too deep in the beginning, but now with the predominance of a lot of chop shops, where they're bringing in mariculture colonies and fragging them into smaller saleable items, you don't have to grow that thing out for a year and build up your frag base to sell, so you can make a quicker buck, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that is a fundamental shift in the way things were, let's say, 20 years ago compared to today.
Definitely, like right around the turn of the century, the community was smaller, and we kind of knew all the players. Like there wasn't that many people propagating corals,
Right.
and the community definitely had a agreed upon taboo against chop shopping or hacking and packing. This is different from cut to order frags from like your mother colony or something.
Sure.
But definitely chop shopping was generally frowned upon. And now people don't even ask. They don't even ask. Obviously, there's some strains that are not coming from the wild.
Sure.
And I also used to be completely, like just hardline anti chop shopping, because over time you did see that, like, say, a really nice colony of at the time, let's just say, like, a really sensational chalice coral came in, and it would be cut up, and a lot of those frags would die, but enough of them would live. And I'm coming on the fence, but I feel like an even blend of cutting pieces and actually growing pieces, because even if they're fresh cut, if you get them to encrust and color up and sprout up, that's like 50% grown out. But before we move any further, I really want to make it super clear that Mark and I, we do not, we don't judge anybody and on how they run their business.
Like I said,
you have to make your money where you can. Corals are, you can grow a coral out for 2 years, and right when it's sellable size, it'll just slough off on you, or just completely die, or RTN. And so you have to make your money where you can. So I'm not trying to, I'm not going to, I guess, shame any individuals on how they do things, but maybe we can shame the practices and some of the techniques, or at least. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was gonna say, for me, the act of like taking a mariculture or wild colony and chopping up and selling frags, I actually don't have anything against it, because then that single coral is essentially ending up in multiple tanks, and that's kind of a cool idea. And I can also see it in the sense of, if the mother colony is something that's relatively expensive, getting a frag of it makes it more accessible. But the question I have is, when the frags start to end up in the multiple hundreds of dollars, and I sort the vendor's page by alphabetic name, and I can see all the pieces, and I could essentially in my brain puzzle them back together.
Oh no.
You know what I'm saying? Then I start to think, well, so then what is the value of the mother colony if you look at the price of each frag, and then how does that correlate to the value of the wholesale price? And so to me, that's just a question I have. It's not a judgment. Because like I said, if I could make money, if I could be in the coral business, it'd be a lot of fun, right? Like, it's a fun job, it's a passion. So
it'd be some stress, but
yeah.
I think we need to take a step back and try to compare coral selling, coral propagating, coral harvesting to other industries.
Sure.
And one of the reasons that coral prices are all over the map is that the closest thing that I can compare them to would be like produce, right? And on some level, you have various grades, right? Grade A, grade AA, AAA, and then you have, grades list. And we're talking about fruit. Certain types of fruit are not good enough to sell on their own, and so they might be processed and used in, as an ingredient or as a filler for a pie. Just saying. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like choice fruits that will go for crazy money in Japan, where they have an industry that is suited to grading every kind of fruit. But because our corals don't come from a factory, so they're not cookie cutter, and because when they come from either the ocean or a coral propagator, however they make their corals, the condition of the corals is all over the place. And corals are still new and not uniquely identified, and in different regions, like certain corals might be quite rare. Let's just say in one part of the U.S., like, Southeast Florida, versus like the Midwest versus the West Coast, and so something might be locally scarce and hard to get, but on a wider, when you on a global view, it's the scarcity and demand is just all over the map, and I think that's what's a part of what leads to these crazy prices all over the place.
So, real quick to jump back to the previous topic, I'll just say if we were to time travel back to 2000 and it was not as lucrative to grow and farm and sell corals, the end result was we had a lot less selection, right? We had a lot less options. So I would argue today, I think the fact that it is a profitable business for many folks is a good thing because we have a lot more variety of vendors, and that's a good thing, right?
Right.
But I agree with you on that, on your point as well, in the sense that there's not really a standard around rarity, right? Like there's not, and you even see it like a specific. There's a coral that I had and I lost during the move because I think I mistook it for like a piece of rubble.
Oops.
Yeah, oops. And then I was like, wait, whatever happened to that? And then I was going to buy another frag of it, and the price range varied significantly from
What
vendor
was
to
it?
vendor. Just a typical jack-o'-lantern Leptoceras, right?
Okay.
So I would see them for $39, and I would see them for $99, right?
Yeah.
Depending. And it also depended on the size of the frag, of course. But it was just interesting that, something like that could be all over the place, right? And I would imagine in certain areas, a lot of people have it in their tanks, and in other areas, people don't have a lot of it in their local kind of sourced areas, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, how rarity is graded, to your point, like the fruit analogy,
Mm-hmm.
I don't see much of a standard around that.
No, not at all. And there's definitely a hype factor and a FOMO factor, right? That fear of missing out. And you can create artificial hype by coming up with a silly name and trying to convince someone or that it's rare or scarce or it's really one of a kind. Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's really kind of mind-boggling when you go to certain vendors who have a lot of selection of, let's just say, whole colonies and maybe less frags. Every description is ultra rare, scarce, one of a kind, retina bleeding, and then the next description is something exactly along those lines. And like most of the corals on there will have that same description. And yeah, the thing about the reef shows is that I feel like that really plays on FOMO because I feel it, right? You know that you're in a location and in a short window of time where a bunch of people are coming through and they're all looking for coral, they're all for shopping for coral, and you could make the rounds and go see, what someone else is pricing a coral at. But by the time you come back, maybe that one colony will be gone, or that one exact frag you want will be gone. And man, I've just taken a long-term approach to, man, I'm going to get that coral when I find it at a reasonable size and a price that I can live with. So some great examples for me is I think I might have mentioned this before, but my Miami Chalice, first frag sold for like over $1,000. I picked up like a 3-inch diameter colony, I think last year for $200. But it was a colony, it was like this freaking big. And because it wasn't in the hype anymore, nobody wanted it. I mean, it's got pretty nice color, but it doesn't, really make you say, oh, what is that? What is that coral? So yeah, the pricing is all over the map. And like shrooms, there's definitely a double-edged sword, right? Because before the bounce shroom, we can totally trace it back to the original Rhodactis bounce from Worldwide Corals with those crazy neon orange vesicles. Before that strain came around, except for Recordia and very nice Yumas, you couldn't get any money for single polyps of Rhodactis or Discosoma. That was not a thing. And so on the one side, a nice colony of just say purple discosomas might have been $60 to $99 if it was large and really covered. And now everybody's trying to sell you one one polyp at a time.
Oh yeah. Another coral I want to, like I said in our last podcast, that it's funny. I kind of I've struggled with Rhodactis and Recordias, which for having a softy dominated tank, it's like, come on, those are great corals to have, right? So again, I wanted to go get a Superman Rhodactis and give it another go, and it's like some of these vendors, like one polyp, one mushroom was $50, and I was like, come on, man, and maybe that's the appropriate market price these days, but it's
again, it really
hard
depends on the scale, right?
Yeah.
If you're promoting that to a global audience and you're taking a macro photograph and you're trying to highlight or accentuate a little extra fluorescence around the tips or the potential for some colorful vesicles in the center, to the right buyer, that might be worth $100. But here, actually in Colorado, we've had a really nice blue and red Superman style Rhodactis. It came from kind of northern Colorado. And if you go around to the shops here, man, you'll find some chunks, with a few polyps that they'll have multiple examples, and those will be like $40 to $60. But like small colonies.
Yeah.
That might have changed in the last couple of years. But I know up until I set up the studio, I already had a colony, and I would see them around.
Yeah, I think the other missing part of the equation when you look at some of the pricing, not when we get into crazy pricing, but even at the lowball, like lower level $50 frags, is that you see these vendors offering like free shipping if you buy $150 worth of coral or $250 of coral. But the thing is, that's because they're building the shipping into the pricing, right?
Oh yeah.
So in the end, maybe it's not so bad. If you buy a bunch of corals, you end up, balancing out. Whereas, like, hey, you may find a vendor that's much cheaper, but once you throw $40 shipping on top, then it sort of all balances out anyway. So, I think that's the other thing is, like, I'll see vendors charge more for frags, but then you go, okay, yeah, but if I get $150 worth of frags, then the shipping is free. But the ironic part is, like, you can get up to $150 with just one frag, right? So,
yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
it's just it's really hard to navigate, especially for a newer reefer. And I think part of the high price of corals has been sustained by a steady stream of newer aquarists who are not actually familiar with what's going to grow out and look great and what is legitimately rare. Like, I have 10 super ultra rare corals that maybe nobody else in the country has because they're so oddball, but they're gray and brown or green and no one would, besides Julian, would point out and say, oh, what's that? I want a piece of that, because they're super odd. So there's that, but definitely there's almost like a weird arms race when it comes to the pricing. Right now we're, with coronavirus and very high shipping costs, like the price is artificially inflated through logistics. So there's certainly an aspect right now, probably like 20%, maybe up to 30% of the retail price, especially if colonies, not of locally made frags, that is shipping, man. I've talked to a few importers right now. The price of corals or shipping corals from Western Australia is $25 per kilogram. And the shipping of the coral can cost more than the coral itself. You can buy a $2 coral crazy. And land it for $20 after it has a long flight to wherever it's going. But probably the biggest issue is the hype. You've seen the hype on the forums, and you see people hyping out corals that they're just about to cut up, for their own benefit or their friend's benefit. And the producers and the harvesters and the coral farmers, they see that, right?
That was my
Everything is
question to you.
International, and they're like, why am I selling this coral for? I mean, you would not believe what the price of corals, wild corals, used to be. I mean, we're talking like $2, $3, $5, $10 before like the shipping really exploded. I mean, some of these coral pieces were just so freaking cheap, like green star polyps. I mean, that would have landed in LA for like $7 of a big old colony, and then that would be, probably wholesale for, like, say, 25, $30. And then that would retail for 50 to $60. Good luck finding a rock of really nice green neon star polyps now for anywhere near that, if anybody's even bothering to play with them. But yeah, there's definitely like this weird arms race where, the select dealers in certain markets in Asia, Europe, America are putting like a really premium price tag on corals, and it doesn't matter what the coral actually sells for, because the exporter or the collector or the coral farmer sees that and like, hey, I want a cut of that. I could, you can afford to pay a couple bucks more, and because then the price goes up, the wholesaler has to sell it for more, the retailer has to sell it for more, and then they have a newer, higher price tag, and then it just goes back to the beginning. And we've had this feedback loop for like 20 years, which has caused, regular rocks of shrooms to go from $40 to $60 for a big old colony to the same price or more for a single polyp.
Yeah, because I'm being an outsider, I had two questions around that. And one was, I don't know if, you don't have a crystal ball, but as more flights resume from Australia, from Indonesia, with COVID, slowly going away, as there are more flights and the cost of those flights goes down, would we actually see corals start to drop as much as we expect? Because, like my local fish store, the owner brought up a good point that, when he suddenly had to pay higher wholesale prices, he was he said, I wasn't sure that people would pay these prices for corals. If I brought them in. And I think the example he gave was goniopora, but he's like, but sure enough, somebody comes in and buys it, and he's like, okay, what I thought was the psychological or barrier of entry, like what the limit was for what somebody was willing to pay, was not where it was. People were willing to pay more, so that's now out in the open, right? That's exposed. Like, oh, people are willing to pay that much, so even if things become more cheaper further down in the supply chain, will the retail customer actually still see that, or maybe not as much? That's one question I have. The other question I have is, if I'm a coral farmer and I'm mariculturing corals and I see folks in the U.S. chop my maricultured corals up into smaller pieces and selling them, why wouldn't I just start doing that too? I'm just going to start shipping smaller maricultured corals. I'll chop them up, wait for them to heal.
Reasonably frag, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So that's a multi-part question.
Sure. Yeah.
And one thing I do want to make clear is that the export prices of corals from Indonesia, Fiji, they were like slave labor prices.
Yeah.
Right. $2 to $3 for assorted soft corals. I mean, even in Indonesia, like, that's just not even paying the bills and the overhead and the gas, and like they're buying some rice, but that was some really low wage for those people in developing country. I'm not sure if Indonesia qualifies as a third world country. I would definitely say it's a developing country, but we don't have that third world, first world, something in between. So to be clear, the farmers, the actual farmers who put in investments into their farms, and into their people, because there's a lot of paperwork involved, man. They don't just take a coral and shove it in a bag and send it off. It's a pain. So they deserved to increase their prices, especially the Indonesian coral farmers who had a long hiatus for, was it, year and a half, almost 2 years? So that was one part of the question. What was another part of the question?
Well, no, I agree with you. It's sort of like the same principle as fair trade coffee, right? I mean,
yeah, it's very, very similar. The other one on the freight prices. So I don't remember what it was, but was it like 10 years ago? Like Congress, I think, maybe passed a law that allowed the airlines to charge for luggage. I know I'm getting some of these details wrong, right? They were having a hard time, and maybe it was after the financial crisis. I know I'm getting this wrong, so don't put me on blast in the comments on this one. But the airlines, just to kind of recoup some costs, they started charging for luggage and then for carry-ons, and then the airlines are doing fine, and Did they stop charging for luggage and for carry-ons and all these little things? No, they just kept that, right? They just kept that as part of their bottom line. And so, at the beginning of the chain, like, do you think? I mean, airlines. It's going to be a while before airlines feel the pressure to go back to normal prices, or at least bring it back to close to where it was. Right? Prices are always going up, but when they do you think Joe Wholesaler is going to turn around and be like, oh, okay, great, now I can sell my corals for lower? No, he's going to enjoy that extra margin, and he's going to sell his corals for more, for the same as he always had, but he's going to be making a little bit more money. It's like, it's human nature to a degree, right? Like, I want to say this again, we're not harping on anyone, maybe certain practices, but I think we have a really nice bow at the end of this entire discussion, because I know where I want to end up, but we're meandering on the way there. So I don't think the airlines are going to drop the prices, and if they do, I don't think the people in the supply chain are going to be eager to give that this newfound margin back to their customers, and on and on and on.
No, I mean, first of all, for me, I look at it from an observational, objective point of view, because you don't have to buy any of these corals, right? So, like, for anybody to get upset about it, it's like, just don't buy it. Go buy a $30 frag of something else. True. Sorry, excuse me. But for me, it's just observational. I find it interesting, right? Like, if and maybe that's the answer to my first question, is that if demand does start to go down post-COVID, right? I mean, somebody was talking about that bunch of people got COVID pets, and now that they're going back out into the world, they're abandoning their pets, which is horrible.
That's an interesting point, because annually, the aquarium hobby has experienced a lull, like a significant slowdown in sales and activity in the summertime. I always called it the summer doldrums. When I worked retail stores, we spend that time to build new displays and just kind of revamp equipment and do some annual maintenance, and maybe try to work on some bigger setups instead of just kind of general sales in the shop. And so last year, through COVID and everything, there was nothing. It did not slow down. It was just like a straight flat line of growth. And this year, let's see, we're already in early June. Right when the kids get out of school. Do kids still go to school now? Like, I'm out of touch. I don't know.
Yeah, my kids are out of school.
Okay, right. When they went to school and they're out of school, then it's time for vacations and going out and doing things and enjoying the outdoors. And so this year we are experiencing that. So it'll be very interesting to see if the COVID pet shedding syndrome adds on to the reef aquarium boom that we've experienced the last year and a half. That'll be interesting, and I'll be here to collect all those used corals.
Yeah, and going back to the folks farming it and everything, the one thing I do try to remember in all of this is that these things, in a way, should not be cheap, right? If you're pulling something out of the ocean, or you're growing it in the ocean, and there's people maintaining these mariculture farms, and it gets on a freaking airplane and it goes to LAX, and these are delicate animals, and I feel like they should marine life should never be at like guppy PetSmart prices, right? I remember
Mark Sherman, who still has a store here locally, which is mostly focused on freshwater.
Yep.
In 1999, if you showed up on Fridays and you bought the acros out of the bag, you could get 4 colonies for $100. And they were mostly Fiji, and so there's a couple dozen varieties that you might get. But 4 colonies for $100. Oh my God! You were saying if I could go back in time, I would buy a lot of coral.
Oh man, the Bob Mencken era, right? Like
the Bob Mencken era. But it's a good point. It's like, on the one hand, like, we're used to certain corals being cheap, but on the flip side, like, these are delicate animals that should enjoy a lot more care along the way, so that they're well taken care of, and definitely have a lot more respect for I wouldn't say respect, but more esteem for companies that focus on value and quality and health versus volume and hot potato and flip it as fast as you can.
Yeah, and then on the hobbyist side, right, you will not think of it, you will be less likely to think of an organism as a disposable thing if it's expensive. I mean, that's just I mean, I'd like to say that we all treat all animals with respect, but one if a $20 fish versus a $200 fish, a lot of people out there are going to put a lot more effort into taking care of that $200 fish and buying the right equipment for it than a $20 fish. So there is that side benefit, right? When something's expensive, you're gonna care for it better. So
This whole conversation is an exercise in the abstract. Like
yeah,
on the one side, we're like, "Oh, corals are so expensive. Why are they so expensive? They shouldn't be this much." And on the flip side, we're like, "Well, corals are to be appreciated and respected, and that goes with fish, and they should cost a lot more." I'm literally holding these two opposing ideas in my mind at the same time. Like I said, I have a great bow to put on this conversation, but yeah, let's talk about art.
oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a well-known syndrome in the art world that if you paint a painting and price it at $100, depending on what it is, most people are probably not going to look at it very hard. And you take that same painting and price it at $15,000, and people will at least just look a little closer and be like, well, why? And not going to name names, but man, I swear there's a couple guys out there that are almost predatory with their pricing for corals that they haven't grown out, that they didn't know nothing about. They don't know what those corals are going to look like because they've never grown out, and they're sounding like just historically small. Like a frag of acropora where you can count the number of coralites is not cool unless it's free.
It
That's
doesn't
just
look like
not
this.
cool. Yeah, that's an awesome shirt right there, man. I love the
Three
negative
branches,
black and white.
man.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, I
frags
mean,
these days are like that.
yeah, yes, exactly. We used to have a term for it called boogers when they're so small but at least workable. But now I have to come up with a new category that I call shard, where
Yeah.
you're like, I don't even know if that's an acro or Porites or a stylophora or I'm looking around, or just an encrusted piece of sponge. It's like it's so freaking small, and but again, it's like no one has to buy a coral. But there's definitely a few companies that will put like a crazy, and I would barely even call them companies. Let's call it, put it out there. They'll put a crazy price tag on some coral that they've never grown out. Put a silly name on a strain that's from a mariculture farm, so it's not rare. It's coming in from multiple different directions, and multiple people are fragging it and keeping it in different conditions, and it's developing different colors and appearances based on the conditions, and you can't really tell them apart. But man, I'm telling you, the coral farmers in Indonesia, there's not that much diversity to go around. Like, first of all, any of these rainbow tenuis, ain't none of them wild. None of them are wild. They're all farmed, right? But it's because it goes back to the produce aspect. The condition and the quality and the grade is all over the place. And I'm telling you, like, most of these coral farmers, they might have, I don't know, 10, 12 different strains of rainbow tenuis, and they buy from each other, and they might even steal from each other. They might have farms right, next to each other in certain regions of Indonesia that have been, identified as been really conducive to coral growth. So they're not going to go find a whole new section of, coastline to grow their corals on. It's going to be right next door to this dude. And, when they're not looking, you just run over there, grab a frag, put it on your table, and start growing that out. Like, that's human nature. I think I would even do that. I mean, it's weird to say that, but I'm like, you don't own that coral. You won't, So yeah, there's definitely an art aspect of putting a crazy price tag on something, and somehow that convinces people of the value of the coral. Again, like, I want to end on the value note, but none of us have to buy this stuff, so we don't have to complain about it. But you and I, we're here to rant a little bit.
Well, yeah, for me, it's like when I see the Micromusafrags, when I see the Favia frags. I mean, I don't know the scale of some of these shops and their operations, but I'm like, I tend to start to wonder if those are either wild or maricultured colonies that were identified. Oh, that's the Ultron Favia right there coming in this shipment. Let me take that. Let me chop it up. Um, I could be wrong. I don't know. It's just I've grown these corals in my own tank, and sure, I'm not running a carbon dioxide scrubber, and like tweaking everything for maximum growth and feeding them heavily, but I just can't imagine they're very good for propagation in terms of just getting a steady supply of frags and availability, unless you just have a crap ton of mother colonies,
Yeah. No, I mean, here's the thing. If you can verify and find some coral vendors that you have a lot of faith that they are primarily culturing their own corals. When it's like customer service. When you know that guy has grown that coral under certain conditions, maybe a variety of conditions, and you pay a premium but reasonable price for that coral, you're going to be able to call him up or her up and get incredible amounts of detail and information about the growth pattern and behavior and long-term development of that coral in your particular environment. That's some crazy value when it's and I feel like there's a lot of crossover between the different topics that we've had, and I feel like this pushback, this anti-intellectual pushback against knowing the real coral names, that is being perpetuated by some of the coral vendors who have an inherent stake in keeping people confused about what corals really are, so they can give it a goofy name. And you know what? If it doesn't sell this week, next week we'll give it a different name, take it under slightly different coloration. We'll call it something else, and then maybe it'll move. And that's like no different than people selling flowers or produce or livestock or pets. Anything that doesn't come from a factory is prone to that kind of psychological manipulation.
Well, and again, like I said, I don't really have anything against a chop shop, because I kind of like the idea of a wild colony getting distributed, right? But I remember we used to do that at our local clubs. Like, we'd all pitch in, and like you and I did that a few times. We would buy a coral and then chop it up together, and split the cost. But just call it what it is, right? Like, that's all I'm saying is like they're being a little bit obfuscating of it. They're kind of like making it seem like they grew these things in their warehouse under lights, and these are aquacultured, but they're not. And just so call it what it is, man. And I'll still buy it,
I did notice that very recently, one of the major players, and I don't want to name any names, because if I start naming names, then I need to
You're
start
gonna be in
throwing out
trouble
all the
on
names.
that.
No, it's not about the
just
trouble.
kidding.
It's just like I don't want to. But one of the major players, you can guess who they are. They recently started doing something super cool. They started showing the colonies.
That's cool.
Their own colonies under regular lighting, and that gives you two things. One, like a tiny little frag always has the best colors, like just absolutely concentrated. The growth tip, the growth margin, which is different from the growth tip, then the growing edge or encrusting edge. And man, if you've ever seen a colony of a Superman or a Rainbow Monty, like I say, a frag, 1 or 2 inch, freaking amazing. Keeping that coloration across like on a big encrusted section, that is next level. But it's very easy to do in a 1/2 inch to a 1 inch frag, right? Have that crazy growth margin with super bright polyps. This is something I'm really going to be pushing for, is like, tell me a story. You want to sell this coral for a groundbreaking price? Tell me a story about the coral. Tell me where it came from geographically, or who cultured it first. Tell me add value, like add to the story, add to the experience. Tell me, what kind of conditions is it like? Tell me a couple anecdotes about that coral. Tell me about the time it almost completely died back on you, and then it was so hardy and wanted to live in your tank so much that it came back brighter and stronger and growing faster than ever. But definitely a great first step is show us your mother colonies. I feel like anyone who's legitimately propagating and growing, culturing corals in a captive environment show us your mother colony. Show us what it's going to turn into. You know, a great example would be the pink Cadillac Acropora. We know what that is. You know, it doesn't matter who he came from, but a frag looks amazing. A colony, yeah, you know what? From across the room, all those colors kind of blend. It's kind of brown.
Yeah.
You know, you look closely at that beauty cover magazine photo of pink Cadillac, and you see the tips, you see the base color, you see the colored polyps, you see the encrusting edge. But when you see one grown out and you take a couple steps back, you're like, I don't know. That coral wouldn't even grab my attention. I wouldn't even lean in to look at it a little bit closer.
Well, and you build up the mythology a bit more, you know. I mean, that's the old named corals, the Oregon torts and the purple monster and
the Langsai cat.
Langsai, perfect. I mean, the guy's name is in the coral name, right? But there's a mythology, not a mythology, because that.
No, I think mythology is great.
Yeah, there's a story, right? So
There's
start
a story and a history, and
Yeah.
so many people have that coral. And we're getting back on the coral names, but those corals, man, they are just so special.
Yeah. And I mean, I also get that inflation plays a part and all that. But I guess a good analogy for me is like if you're really engaged in the hobby, like someone like you, right? It's like you don't really notice your own kid growing up, but then when you see like your nephew, like every family reunion, you're like, holy crap, that kid's grown, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that was always like with corals, where I mean, you know me, I've always kept a reef tank, but I'm not always in the market for corals. Like eventually my tank's filled, things are growing out, and then I'm in maintenance mode. I'm sort of like the guy that witnesses the nephew at the family reunion, where it's like a year goes by and then I jump back in like, I'm gonna get some corals, and then I'm like, holy crap, what's going on here?
This is the first time I've had this many tanks. I got like 50 feet of tanks, and for probably like a year and a half, man, I was in acquisition mode, like hardcore. And then I put the brakes for 6 months, like the last 6 months of last year. I was like, you know what? I really don't want anything more. I want to take care and really get everything that I have in the place where it needs to go, in perfect condition and groomed and curated properly. And so, with things kind of opening back up this year, I was on that track again, and now I'm backed off again. So for 6 months, I'm like, yes, let me get it. And I think in the last 9 to 12 months, I've gotten shipments from almost everybody that you might know of. Right, probably like 30 shipments, but sometimes it might literally be just like one little frag, and with shipping is like $60-$70. But yeah, right now I'm back in the mode of like, all right, let me stop, hang back. I actually need to get rid of some corals because some of the corals have just grown. So I'll figure out how to do that. But yeah, all right. So let's talk about the live sales. I feel like live sales is it's predatory on people's fear of missing out. And again, just preface this where no one needs a coral. No one has to buy a coral, right? But it definitely makes you scratch your head as a lifelong aquarist, where you see a coral's retail sticker price is like $200, and then life sale price is $30. Like, really? Is that the kind of industry that we want to be? And on the flip side, like it's exciting, right? If you're participating in an auction style, like eBay or the live sale, you have to be plugged in, and there is an excitement to it. There's an experience part to it, but that's just I don't know. What do you think about live sales?
It's funny you brought up, because you brought up the FOMO at like being at a reef convention and everybody's staring at the same coral, and you're like, oh, I better get that. But while you were saying that, I was thinking like, well, there's some online equivalents of that, right? And I thought about live sale as a specific example. The less so one that I also thought about is like, I know I'm not the only one that at 6 p.m. Eastern is hitting refresh on Live Aquarius Diver's Den, right? Like you're like, ooh, and then you see like that fish you want. You're like, oh, I got to get it in my cart before somebody else does. And then you end up buying a fish that you weren't sure about getting anyway. But yeah, I can't keep up with the live sales. And a lot of people are like, well, corals are affordable if you just do like the live sales. Like don't buy them when there isn't a live sale. And I'm like, man,
do we really have to play this game?
Yeah.
Like, do we really have to play this game? Once again, it's exciting to see a coral that was priced at $200 now being sold for $30. But like, where's the value? Like, what does the coral actually cost you to produce? You know, when a coral goes from 200 to, you know, like 75% off, 80% off, like you're like, did you grow that coral? Because you feel like that those steep price cuts are probably mostly on chop shop corals, right? And so, you know, let's just say take like a wild candy coral or wild moon coral brain, like a Favites or Favavia, that's probably going to have, you know, somewhat muted coloration or is pretty common. You might pay $50 for that, but you might make, I don't know, 25, 30 frags, still sell those frags for $40. So you're turning a $50 coral into, my math is bad right now, too much drinking. What's 25 times 50? $1,000. $1,000, you know, if you get that money, but then you put it on clearance for, you know, $10. And like, all right, that's,
Well, and yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, that's probably a chop shop coral, because if you actually really grew that coral, that value is not going to shift from, you know, by 75 to 80%, honestly.
Well, and it's funny because that's where the puzzle piece and thing came in, because I remember clicking on a vendor's live sale, and you know, you go to page 2, page 3, and there's like 30 pages of corals. But I was like, man, it's like a recurring theme of the same corals. And I was like, that's weird. And so then I was like, well, you know what? Let me just sort by alphabetical name, and that way I can skip through the corals I'm not really that interested in. And that's where I was like, you know, it's kind of funny when you do that. You can kind of see all the pieces that were like part of one coral, you know, and I just had to laugh a little bit, like, okay.
Yes, and then you know that was a chop shop coral.
Yeah.
Like that was a, you know, fairly affordable wild coral, but just because it went through the hands of this one person, oh yeah, now they're trying to multiply the value from $40 to $1,000, which again, you know, make money how you can, but is that a sustainable way to run a business?
And if it's a $300 coral and now you've chopped it 10 ways and you're making it accessible for me at $30 a frag, that's fair, man. That's great.
Very different,
you know?
right? But I love what you're saying about, you know, the whole alphabetical, and you can kind of like visually put the pieces of frags back together.
Man.
They're not even like healed or encrusted or anything. But yeah, I try to follow up on a live sale one time, like literally one time, and it was just such a gamification because there was this drive to get people to post and comment, but like, all right, you know, whoever guesses how many frags we're going to put up on our next drop, you know, you get a $10 coupon towards your order. You don't actually even win anything. And there'd just be like pages of numbers, people posting one number. Like, it's not for me, man. Like I said, I play a really long game when it comes to corals. And I think, did you have any other major points that you want to get into before we both settle into how we feel about our coral acquisitions?
Let's see, I made some notes, which I think for the most part I covered. The only other observation, and maybe it's subjective and just in my head, but I was like you back in the day where if something was out of my price range, I would just wait it out a year or so and then it would be affordable. But it seems like the value the price seems to hold longer now. And I don't know why that is. It's like that if you know, like orange Capricornus was hard to get at one point, right? But it rapidly, and that's a fast growing coral, so maybe that's a bad example, but it rapidly dropped in asking price. Now I see corals that 2 years ago I wanted to buy, and they're still expensive. And I'm like, all right, still waiting for that price to drop on that thing. And part of that could be these are slower growing corals. They're harder to propagate because, you know, I mean, bounce mushrooms is a good example, right?
They are,
but they're not
they grow
fast growing.
steadily, but
Yeah.
they're not just like shedding baby polyps the way a discosoma used to. Yeah. And
or jawbreaker mushrooms, right?
those are notoriously slow growing. Yeah, for sure. So that one kind of makes sense. There's just a very slow production rate, and the true jawbreakers are going to be cultured, and yeah, they're not putting out a lot of offspring very quickly.
That's fair. And maybe that's my interest being no longer really in, at least for now, I'm not really into SBS. So maybe my observation of things holding their higher value longer is simply because my interests have shifted to perhaps corals that are not as fast growing and propagatable.
So I kind of want to like talk about the story of the weeping willow leather coral. Like that's a strain name that's like almost internal family community. You've seen it in multiple tanks over like decades. And I remember when I started sharing that on Reef Builders, I had two thoughts. One, I love this coral and it's awesome, and just I just want to share it. And my second thought, like, and this was a hoop dream. I was like, maybe putting the weeping willow out there will make people care about brown leather corals. And I would say, for the last 3 or 4 years, I had forgotten that second fact, and I was more peeved that so many people were just slapping the weeping willow name on brown leather corals. But then on the flip side, all of a sudden now, brown leather coral frags are going for ridiculous prices, and they have nothing going on. They might be a little bit long polyp. I think I mentioned this in a previous video. Like, I saw some brown leather corals, like super hyper average, that should have been almost like throwaway frags, or just like freebies. They were priced at $85, and then more recently, I saw a nondescript, not even long polyp, not even pretending to have the name weeping willow leather coral. It was priced at $129.99 on eBay plus $39.99 shipping. So we're talking about a frag of brown leather coral going for, or at least asking price for almost $200. Like, that's unheard of. But on the flip side, I know that, like, 2 to 3 years from now, I'll go to a bunch of reef shows, go visit more aquarists and more reef shops, and there's going to be like this crazy diversity of like brown leather corals that people are proud of. That's going to be amazing, So I had forgotten that second part of like, oh, maybe people will start caring about brown leather corals. And like now I'm like, oh, you care too much about brown leather corals.
Well, it's funny because, yeah, like Japanese green weeping willow leather or whatever, and it was like $100 frag. And then for almost the same price, I just saw like a Sarcophyton elegans, a yellow Tonga leather on Live Aquaria. For a wild colony. I don't think it was maricultured. It was about the same price. It wasn't like crazy $300, which if you think about it, a banana yellow leather.
Yeah.
Now, granted, it's going to look like crap under everybody's blue lights, but, unless you like daylight spectrum like I do, it's probably not the coral for you anyway. But I just kind of find it funny, like, that's a really cool coral, and that's a colony, and it's about the same price as, a booger, as you called it, of like some Japanese. Is it really from Japan? That's the other thing. Like, maybe it is, but I'd love to learn about where, like, how did it come from Japan?
And that's the thing. Here's the thing. Like, some of these corals might actually come from Taiwan, but just to make them sound more exotic, they'll say they came from Japan. Or vice versa. Like, who knows? Like, I just want to know the truth. And I'm really coming to a new realization, like a new chapter in my reef aquarium career. Because, like, man, ever since I was like 13, 14, and I got my first Royal Gramma, then I learned about the black cap Gramma. And I was like, ooh, that's special. After I got a yellow tang, I'm like, oh my God, there's a purple tang? That's great. It's from the Red Sea, and they cost $100. In 1990, that was 1995. That was a lot of money. And on and on. And then once I got the black cap Gramma, I learned about the green stripe Gramma, Gramma linkai. I'm like, oh, those are unobtainable. Like, no one's ever seen that. And I feel like I have been raising my own expectation of marine life for 20 years. And I've done this a little bit at the studio, where I've been culturing some of these exotics. Well, now I have to say uncommon instead of rare, because rare doesn't mean anything. So I say uncommon when I'm talking about my branching Echinopora or my Palau Estrella or some of my strains of Montes, because they're not hype. I'll just say uncommon. But I got this very expensive double clam, and it's incredible, and I hate it. Because clams, they can die on a dime, and no one knows anything about this clam, and so it's like a super exciting. And if I get through it with this clam, I am going to love it forever. But right now, it is sucking up so much of my attention because I'm fretting over it, right? Because it's cost so much, and I don't really enjoy that thing I mean, it's not more presentable than one of my large Durasas that I got for no money, for like pocket change, a couple years ago. That's almost the same size. And same thing with the fish on Reef Builders. We've tried to stir up attention and excitement, right? It's about cheerleading for the hobby by constantly rallying around these rainbow-colored acanthophilias, these psycho-colored spirograph scalemias, and these fish that you've never freaking heard of. And it's really becoming clear to me that I don't really get more enjoyment out of some of these crazy exotics, but I might have a lot more stress, and so I think over the next couple years I'm gonna just go back to purple discosomas and standard hammer corals and royal grammas and pajama cardinalfish and green
You're speaking
chromuses.
my language.
I enjoy these things from across the room, like regular orange acans. Like, I'm going back, man. I'm going back to my roots. There's a reason some of these really common fish are so widely popular and just have like this timeless quality. And you know what? I'm going to save a lot of money, and I'm going to enjoy the hobby so much more because I'm not stressing over a $200 single polyp of some crazy name zoanthid. Give me the Bam Bams. Give me the Rastas. Give me the the purple deaths and the purple people eaters and some standard kind of pink zoanthids, and they're going to grow fine. And you know what? You get those in perfect condition, like really great peak of health, they're going to shine. They're going to shine from across the room and in a way that, any rainbow coral from across the room is brown. All those colors like bleed together, and unless you're looking at it through like a mesoscope or a macro lens, like you're just not going to see that from a day to day to day. And so there's definitely this this digital aspect to the reef aquarium hobby where people are enjoying pictures of corals and being part of a club more than they're enjoying looking at their actual corals analog, face to face.
I think I said it in the last podcast. I had this weird epiphany that I was like, I've sort of become a planted tank guy trapped in a reef keeper's body because, one, the aesthetic of the whole tank matters to me, right? Like, I don't want a freaking trident or reef bot or alcatronic, and I don't want it to look like a science project. I like everything simple, and just kind of functioning, kind of natural. But I also like just I like particular corals because they're interesting and they're pretty like everybody else, but it's also about the aquascape and about growing out large colonies. And we talked about how the most common fish or coral, but in peak of health, is a jaw dropper, right? So, so for me, it's like I'm happy just to aquascape up a softy tank and then throw some fish that I like in it and just enjoy the tank and not stress about it. And to your point, do I have holy grail fish? Yeah. My holy grail fish is a conspiculatus angel, which I'm sure is a holy grail for many people. And I know you got some.
Yeah.
The other one is Resplendent Angel, but I was stupid not to buy one of Frank's when he was captive breeding those because I thought $600 was too much. But yeah, if I bought a $3,000 fish and put it in my tank, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night, man. I'd be so stressed about that thing. Vacations would suck.
Yep.
And this sort of is a seesaw. I don't want to sound like a hypocrite where we were talking about the more expensive something is, the more likely you are to care for it. But I still think that's true, but it can get to an extreme. If something's so expensive that you have your level of responsibility and worry increases to the point that it's no longer enjoyable, that's the problem, right? Like I treat a $20 fish with the utmost care, which means when you give me a $3,000 fish, I'm going to go insane, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna be
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hear you on that, man.
Yeah, so, one of the corals that was hard for me to find, bro, was regular purple digitata. And it was very frustrating to see German blue polyp monopore digitata being sold as purple digitata over and over again. I'm like, do you not know what a purple digitata looks like or what it can do? And you know,
Have you
it's
found one? I don't
Oh
think
yeah,
I've
yeah. I
seen
got.
one in
You know what's
eternity.
funny is I bought 3 frags from some spot, and it was like $40 for a bunch of frags. Shipping was more than the purple digital because they're just like, no, get this out of here. And like that same week, I walked into a store. There was a pile that someone had brought in. That was just sitting there on the ground, like ready to be, glued, like on the bottom of an aquarium, ready to be glued. And the store just gave it to me. So I spent like, I don't know, $75, $80 getting 3 nicely mounted frags, and then I got a handful in a Ziploc bag for free that I had to mount myself, and that was, that now I have a lot more of. But you know what I bought recently? It's funny. I've had 4 Galaxia strains for, I don't know, 6, 7 years. But I have, I have a golden one with the green sheen. I have a yellow one with the green mouth. I have a solid kind of standard yellow Galaxia, and then I have one like the neon green hedgehog style Galaxias with like a brown mouth. And it just occurred to me as like, I paid a lot of money, reasonably amount of money for each of these Galaxias, and they're still growing out. And just the other day at the store, you know what I did? I got a big old colony of green Galaxia for $50. $50. And when that thing is just like presented properly and it gets large and long flowy polyps, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be right next to the golds, and just random people who see them, someone point out the gold, but they're going to point out the bigger one with the crazy flowing polyps. So
Well,
yeah, I'm definitely circling back. I'm like, I just want to grow out big fields of green star polyp, green
you
clove
can.
polyps, orange clove polyps, staghorns. Like I don't care if it's brown and it has blue tips. Just I want a bunch of staghorns and just normal, healthy, low stress stuff that I will just enjoy it so much more. To your point, because I'm just gonna let it grow and grow and grow, and it's gonna be a big, large, showy, showcase colony that'll really demonstrate the unique details, features, and characteristics of a mature colony.
The centerpiece of my tank is a leather coral that's 15 inches wide with like these white polyps, right? It's just common leather. I've had it since it was a frag, right? So there's just the best feeling to see a coral that you grew from a frag to something bigger than a basketball, right?
Mm-hmm.
And man, when it's flowing in the current with like 3 billion polyps, I mean, and everybody that comes in my house that's the thing they're drawn to, right? A big brown leather coral, but it's in a peak of health. It's big.
It's funny. I have one that I'm sure you're going to appreciate. It's the one that's my mangrove tank lit with the Kessels. It's not brown, and it's not the Fiji yellow leather, but it's what used to be called like a gold crown leather. So it's like a light canary yellow with kind of whiter polyps. And when that thing's open up and it's super happy, it's just it steals the spotlight in that tank. Filled with purple torts and purple milk stylo, green astropore, red thin branching, all kinds of like brighter stuff. But that light yellow saffron sarcophyton is it's an awesome piece. I need to frag it up and make sure I spread it around a little bit.
But it definitely circles around to we both said you don't have to buy these things. So, if people want to sell at a price they want to sell, more power to them. And it's more power to us if we want to buy it at that price or not. At the end of the day, I sometimes get a little disenchanted when I'm on Instagram and I start to kind of feel, I don't know, icky about the hobby.
Yeah,
And then I just got to take a step back and either talk to you or just tinker with my tank. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's still a
Have a
good
session
zone
of
in there,
relief therapy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes me happy. Like I'm like, this hobby is still fun if you get away from that madness.
The hype, man, the echo chamber. I haven't really been on aquarium forums in over 10 years, and man, I can't think of any coral that I haven't been able to get later.
Yeah.
Right? We're not talking about like showcase, like really sensational pieces of Homophilia australis or Acanthophilia, or certain lobos, but everything that's propagatable. I've always found it multiple times, and I could just wait until the quality and the size and the price is something that I want to pull the trigger. I want to pull the trigger on. That I don't even have to think about it. I was like, oh, all right, that's a fair price. I've been waiting a long time for this coral, and but yeah, so a coral in the Pico Health is always just going to be so much better than a hype coral that just happens to just have the club card that you can say, oh, I have a piece of that in my tank too.
And don't get me wrong, there are hyped up corals right now that I think are really cool and really interesting, and I'm very excited to own one day. But like you, I'll probably wait it out, right? And some of them are getting reasonable. Like there's corals that I want that are now averaging about $100 a frag, and okay, that's still kind of steepish for me, but it's doable at that price, right? That's something where, like, if I'm only buying a coral every other month or maybe two in 1 month, yeah, I could probably manage that, right? Like, that'll be all right.
I for one, am very much looking forward to about 6 to 12 months down the road. I am going to clean up on some larger pieces of no-name, bright pink, low-price pink tenuous, because I don't really want the rainbow, but I would love like a nice chunk of pink tenuous that grabs me from across the room. But I will literally wait. I know where these are coming from. They're being produced in mass, in Indonesia, and they're literally ramping up the supply to try to meet the demand. And at some point, those two are going to invert, and I'm going to find a nice big colony, right? Aquarium colony, 3 inches across, maybe 150 to $200. It'll be amazing. And I'm not going to buy a little booger that in a year or two is just going to be like a few branches about the size of your shirt.
I'm luckily the Euphilia hype, the torch hype. I'm immune to it because Euphilia's my skin tends to I get bumps if I touch one. So whatever nematocyst action's happening with those corals, it just doesn't play nice with me. So that's why I stopped keeping the hammer that we had swapped between. I still have it. It always shows up in my tank. But I wish people would get bored with the cyclos and the fungus. That'd be cool because I've been wanting.
Stop telling them. Stop giving them ideas.
Super boring corals.
Oh yeah, you don't want Cycloceras. Yeah,
especially the orange and green ones or the
and
red
especially
ones.
Go to your store and ask for Cycloceras. I'm sure they're going to have a ton.
Yeah.
That's a little bit inside joke because they're all called fungi these days.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they're really boring. Don't buy those.
Yeah, but I guess to kind of put it back on the value proposition of corals, and I think everything we've said sort of applies to marine fish, but mostly corals because. You buy an annulus angel from one guy or the next guy. The marine species are really, marine fish species are really homogenous. There's going to be a little bit of variation, and especially in the quality. But when it comes to corals, it's all over the map. And I'm glad we haven't really talked specific on prices. We haven't had to, point the figure at anything.
No.
But for the best value, man, it's going to be that coral that someone gave you that they loved. They loved it so much that it would be disrespectful to sell it for $1 or $100, right? To respect that coral is to give it to one of your friends to make sure you can get it back. I have a handful of corals here I got back from you. I have a handful of corals here I've gotten back from other reefers that have been part of my reef aquarium experience, lifelong experience over 20 years. And if I'd sold you those corals 15 years ago, I'd be such a douche.
Yeah.
And
those corals are, and that's the thing, that's how if you want to know how you end up with a tank like mine where it's just a buttload of common cheap corals, is because you end up holding on to a lot of sentimental corals that have a story. And so it's hard to get rid of a coral that has a story that is interesting because a friend gave it to you, or you and a buddy went in on that at a reef convention 10 years ago or something. You end up with all these corals with history, and you don't want to get rid of those and make room for the latest frag, right? So you get sentimental, and the next thing you know, you got a lot of common corals that maybe were rare 10 years ago. But that's okay. That's a great tank to sit and drink a beer in front of, right?
Yeah, very recently I was able to return the favor of some corals that were entrusted to me, and this party had lost them, and I just sent them back. And I sent them back bigger than when I got them. And man, that's the hobby right there. That's stuff you'll be talking about. We'll be talking about till we're old. Not a $300 booger of some Looney Tunes whatchamacallit. You'll forget that frag. You will totally forget that frag. But yeah, I feel like we've made some interesting points about coral costs and pricing and value with some very little specifics. And,
yeah, and again, I don't think we came off as judgmental about it, because economics 101 is the value is there if people are willing to pay for it.
yeah,
People are willing to
absolutely.
pay $600 for a frag. Well, if there's demand at that price point, then sure, dude, sell it at that price point. I get it. So no judgment there, but it's hard to understand how they price things sometimes at the same
Well,
time.
there's so many new people getting in the hobby, and there's so many new people getting into the industry that there's just not very many rules. And it doesn't have to be a rule, right? It just may be like a gentleman's agreement,
Yeah.
a general understanding of how this stuff is supposed to be priced, and what it's worth.
Agreed.
So, yeah, I think that's a good pin in that conversation. I hope it doesn't leave people more confused than when they started, but it should.
Oh, yeah.
It's the produce analogy and the grading. That's something I would like to see more of. Don't give me a silly name for every single thing. When Australia first opened up, you had B grades, you had A grades, and you had premium. And later on, you had just like a small amount of ultra. And that was like really much easier and natural to navigate, and just all these silly prices, like, especially the torches. All right, give me the A grade, the B, A grade premium, and occasionally the ultra. But again, that falls on the eye of the beholder and where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, we probably contradicted ourselves here and there, but I think that's what makes for a healthy debate as well.
We contradicted ourselves a lot.
But that's what happens when two guys are sitting, let's say, at a bar discussing, two hobbyists, right? And they're discussing this. That's sort of where this went, right? Like, we don't have the answers on this, or I don't think our opinion trumps anybody else's opinion. Like, I'm right, you're wrong. It's kind of a gray area, right? Because like I said, I don't like the pricing, but I do like the fact that there's more people in the business of selling corals today than there were 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And, for my part, like, I've gone down that road all the way to the end. I spent a lot of money on one single clam, and it's stressing me out, although it's looking fine today. And I am really circling back to be like, you know what do I enjoy from across the room? What's not going to give me any headaches? What is going to thrive in, a baseline of conditions? You know what? That's the coral I want. And I really feel that strongly about the corals and the fish. And that's going to be where my reef aquarium budget is allocated for the next 6 months to a year. Like, for sure. Like, give me the common stuff. I'm always going to have an eye out for the super exotics, but they're not going to be anything that anyone else is looking out for anyway. A lot of brown corals on my coral shopping list, for sure.
I look forward to your mushroom green star polyp reef.
It's coming. I'm working on some anemones right now.
You got to get the branching green star polyp that Herlock had. That stuff was cool.
It's around, but the hobby has not focused on that, so it's really hard to just call somebody up and be like, hey, you got any branching green star polyp?
I know.
I'll keep an eye out for it.
It's not easy to find, yeah.
And to be honest, when it's fully grown out, it's not that great. It takes up a lot of room to it needs a giant tank for branching green star polyp to really, glow and be impressive. So, I'll do my best, but I've got plenty of pieces of green star polyps around. But now I'm like, all right, well, I want a couple of varieties of green star polyps. Let me get some Briarium and some Pachyclavularia, but yeah, that's a conversation for another one. But bro, I am so glad you're going to be out here in like 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my Lord, we're gonna have to do something really special for that. Maybe maybe we'll come up with some prizes. Maybe I might might pull a couple strings and see if we can do something fun and live. So if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to put those comments down below of what you want me, Mark and I, to do when we get together live.
This thing's heavy, by the way. I'm gonna put it in my suitcase. It's gonna it's gonna add some weight.
I got 2 inputs on my Scarlett, so
right, cool.
That's one less thing to bring. But bring the cable. I'm sure it's attached. But yeah, thanks to everybody for tuning in for another session of Reef Therapy. Of all the content that I've produced in the reef aquarium hobby, I had no idea that this would resonate the most with such a wide audience. And this has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my reef aquarium career, like for sure. So really want to thank everybody for all the feedback that they give. Mark Vanderwall is totally irreplaceable. I'm not sure if we'll ever have a guest, man. We have our format, it's locked in, but it'll have to be a very special occasion. So.
Yeah, this experience has blown my mind. I've really enjoyed it, and I've really appreciated all the positive feedback and stuff. It's made my day.
You got recognized
times.
at a reef store recently, right?
Yeah, it was a cool.
Do you think it was
cool
your
guy
voice?
at the local fish store?
Do you think your voice tips it off?
I don't know. He said I look different in person, so that could be that. But no, he was a nice guy. He said he really liked the reef therapy format. So that totally made my day as well.
It's literally 2 very old pals sitting down, drinking some beers, talking about reef tanks, and just trying to keep it as real as possible, and just give people some insights into, what their reef aquarium experience might have for them down the road.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Mark. All right, we're gonna put a pin in it for this session. Thanks to you all. Make sure to subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcatcher. And if you have any questions, if you're watching on this YouTube, Mark and I are always watching those comments, and we'll be there to participate and engage. So until next session, Mark, we'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Good to talk to you again, Jake.
All right.